So CA dropped a pre-production Medieval 3 stream the other day, mentioning a bunch of the potential features, obviously everything's subject to change at this point, but here's 8 of the more exciting things about Medieval 3. So firstly, as we can see here, a bit of early days pre-production Spain, and we're going back to sort of Shogun 2 where we have the main settlement itself, but then all these little assets around the region, like here is a lumber camp. So that's a cool thing, first of all, just going back to these assets that might be vulnerable to attack, and you can hurt an enemy settlement by taking these down. But what's really cool is that you can actually place these yourself. Watch as the guy places down a castle and then a port wherever the hell he wants. Within reason, of course, a port can only go on the coast. I imagine things like mines have to go in certain areas, but a castle could potentially go anywhere, so you can kind of build your defenses, build your region up how you'd like to. They also mentioned, depending on where you put things like your ports, it could affect your trade routes, your sea routes, so your world is going to feel much more developed and personal to how you built it. And in theory would make every campaign different. If the AI is putting things in different places as well, it's going to make the world grow differently every different campaign. So yeah, kind of feels like a small thing, but it could have quite big impact, so a nice evolution of Total War there. And this ties into something else that was mentioned, and if I understood it correctly, these kind of smaller camps like your lumber camps, your mines, they could potentially turn into little settlements themselves as they grow. So what might start as a small little humble port could turn into a port city eventually, or a mine could become a mining town. So again, some potentially big implications of that, because you are going to be actively changing the map and changing historically what's actually there. And one has to wonder how this will work in terms of limitations. Can I build 5 ports on the same bit of coast? Is that going to quintuple my income from my ports, or will they just be 5 low-income ports rather than 1 big income port? Assumedly, they'll have to share some population, share some resources, so expecting 5 successful ports all next to each other probably isn't realistic. But still, very interesting to see how that kind of mechanic will develop the world, again, especially over different campaigns. Can all these places be razed from the map though, literally removed from existence? Is that possible? If I'm the Mongols and I just want to burn and raze everything in sight, can I do that? Can I destroy the towns, the ports, the mines? Or will they just be kind of ruined until somebody fixes them up again? One for buildings, as we can see by this UI, which is of course nowhere near final, but it's looking very Shogun 2 to me. I quite like it as it is. What you have here though on your certain buildings is kind of add-ons. So you see here he's hovering over one that gives increased food production every turn at the cost of region development. So that's just one option and way to improve it if you want to go in that direction, or if you need more food. Or another option here, increased percentage of urban wealth generation, however exactly that works. Same downside though. So you'll be able to tailor the buildings, if that's the right word, for a lumber camp and a mine and a quarry, but this is pretty cool and gives a nice bit of customization and a bit of personal choice, more depth to each building. Also, I like that it has a downside. That's something we kind of lost in Total War Warhammer, is buildings having downsides. So yeah, just from these 3 first things alone already, we can feel that building your kingdom is going to have a lot more depth there than perhaps ever before. In terms of recruitment for your armies, it was mentioned that soldiers will come from your populations, your different estates, nobles, townsfolk, peasants, and you can choose where they come from. So if you wanted to recruit a big, strong noble cav, you'd need to take it from your noble pool. In this case, 361. So say you had a unit of 60, that's a fair old percentage of your nobles that you're using and taking away from whatever their duties are in the towns and cities to put them in war, and obviously putting them at risk of dying and losing them. Whereas of course if you've got 200k peasants, raising a few units of peasants is much less costly to your kingdom, but those peasants are still going to come off the farms and the mines and whatever else. So waging wars and losing men could have a pretty big impact on your kingdom and your economy. And assumedly you get different quality troops from the 3 types, so if you have noble cav, they're going to be well armored, have the best equipment, the best horses, so they're going to be a stronger unit. Whereas the peasants, they're going to have the crappy armor, the crappy weapons, pitchforks, who knows, and so they will of course be a much more inferior unit. To nobles and townsfolk, maybe somewhere in the middle, but maybe you can build things like blacksmiths or armorers to make better weapons for whichever estate you choose. Nobles, townsfolk, peasants. And you can kind of shape your kingdom again by which ones you use. So if you always use nobles in your armies, you might have very strong armies, but you're not going to have so many nobles in your towns and cities, and that's going to affect your kingdom in a certain way, as opposed to if you made all peasant armies, for example. So yeah, I very much like that soldiers come out of your population, and you have to manage that. Also, tying into recruitment, it's not just going to be the estate that you take your men from, whether noble, townsfolk, or peasant, but also the region of the world that they're in, and of course, their culture. And assumedly you'll be locked to recruiting whatever your kind of culture is, so if I'm playing as the heavily armoured Knights of England, I can't go to Mongolia and just recruit some of their skirmish cav, because they probably won't want to hang with us. But maybe I could go to France and recruit some of their knights or cavalry or whatever. But yeah, if you want certain kinds of units, you're going to have to go to certain regions, certain parts of the world, to potentially get them. Maybe you can mix and match units, who knows. But this is something they did in Pharaoh. I think the different regions of the world would only allow you to recruit certain types of units from that region. So if you recruit a certain type of unit back home, you won't be able to recruit that same unit miles away from home. I'm making some assumptions there by all means, but it sounds like that's largely how it's going to work, and I like it. And in terms of our main currency, money, this is going to be tied to your region wealth, which is the collective number of all the wealth and income from the region. That's pretty normal, right? But region is really the operative word here, because if I understood it correctly, the money that you have in the region is just in that region. It's not in some magical world bank that you can pull from. That 10.1k we can see here on region wealth is only for this region. If we go over to fucking England, maybe we've got a region there, but the region wealth is going to be different. It might only be 3.1k, and then we've got a little bit of France, and maybe it's only 1k there. So the money used to develop your various regions will be tied to the region, and if that region gets attacked by armies, they can take that money from that region and basically rob you blind, potentially. I guess maybe they can't take all of it, who knows. And then it kind of sounded like the money moves around, so if you attack a region and you rob them and sack them, that money isn't just instantly added to your magical world bank, you actually have to take that money back to one of your regions. So if you got attacked and defeated on the way, maybe someone else will take it off you. So the world of robbing other regions, sacking them, taking their stuff, is a much more dynamic one. They also mentioned that vassals could potentially use that region wealth as well if you had vassals, so it's going to have all sorts of interactions. They also mentioned that they want to make tax sexy, so it's not just going to be a single slider that you move up to high tax or low tax, whatever, or with Warhammer just turn tax on or off. There are going to be different ways to do it, so it could just be a percentage of whatever the income of a region is. It could be tributes, it could be rent. They didn't really go into too much detail, but it's exciting to think... Did I just say exciting? We're talking about tax. These different ways of tax are super exciting. Yes! I love tax. Tax is a really fun bill to pay. But from a gameplay perspective, it's a little more exciting to have more options and again, more depth and ways to control your kingdom, and how it's going to shape your kingdom, well, we'll have to see how much of an impact it can really have. But yeah, very nice to hear that another aspect of the game is getting a bit more depth than it maybe ever has before. And lastly, it's the fact that they're trying to work together with us, the community, to shape and build the game. This is why we're being shown this very early pre-production stuff and being asked how we feel about it and asked our opinions. And I think this is potentially a really great way to make this game moving forward. It is a big, important one. If they mess this one up, it's going to make a lot of people write them off. So it's good that they're taking the time to do this and doing it early when they can make changes and finding out what players really want and expect from a Medieval 3 historical Total War game. I believe you can drop your thoughts on the forums and things like that to get your say in. So on the face of it, this seems like a really good move, really open, really transparent, shows us what they're thinking. But I think there's the potential for this to go either way. It's either going to make the greatest historical Total War game ever, potentially, or it's going to make a game that's kind of been pulled in too many directions by too many different ideas and people, and it's just going to be scheisse. So hopefully it's the former, but we're off to a good start. I think everything they've shown here I'm pretty happy with personally, and it's largely what I would have expected from a proper historical Total War game. So yeah, Total War Medieval 3, looking good so far from the little bits we've seen. They said they're going to do more of these kind of streams so we can see what's going on, put your voice in there, and hopefully return historical Total War back to its former glory. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.